Birka Hat. So once you have your strip of fur cut out, you are going to sew it into the loop. I was going to sew that strip of fabric to the back of it, but I kind of figured there's two ways I can do it to stop this from tearing because the skins are very delicate. One is to sew that strip to it, which actually is good if you want to use the fur the way that it could theoretically be used. That kind of thing, sort of the way that the brim of a toque that you roll up is used, where if you need a bit of extra warmth, so if it's wrapped around and normally it's up like this, and you would just flip it down to give a little bit of extra warmth. I don't think this is going to really need that too badly because the person that I'm making this for, I also just made them a really beautiful wool hood, so I don't think they'll need the extra fur on their ears and stuff. So I'm just going to attach it, and then after I attach it, I'm going to sew around the top edge as well, so it's on there just as well, just as protected, just not having to sew the extra strip on the back. If you do want the extra strip and being able to flip it, it's very important that you sew that extra thing on the back because the skins are very delicate on most fur-bearing mammals. So unless you're using something along the lines of deer or something, it's a lot stronger, which you probably wouldn't because it's not exactly the right fur for this application. Maybe reindeer would be, but the types of deer species here aren't exactly. And you wouldn't necessarily use it for that. So anyway, I am going to move the camera and we can get started. So for this, you'll need some kind of thread, something that sort of matches close. I don't have a gray, so I'm using this sort of tan color. Even though I used green before, it's not on this project. It's not super important because the fur will hide most of the stuff that's going on. And so what I normally do is I take a length of thread that's about twice the amount that I normally would take, snip it off, then I thread my needle, then I basically just string it out so that it's about halfway or whatever, and do a loop. And this is so that I'm not relying on a knot to hold the edge of my to hold the thread in the skin, because it will tear through if you do it that way, which is definitely not good. So that gives me my thread. So what you want to do with the fur is you want to put it together, fur sides together, and pushing the fur down and out of the seams so that you don't have a bunch of fur poking through your seam. And as long as you get the front corner done properly, it's not too bad, because you can stick your finger in here and push it down as you go, and that technique will come in handy when you're sewing into the hat. So now you take your thread and you do your first stitch, and you want it to be fairly close to the edge, but not too close that it'll just tear clean through. So you pull it up, and then when you have a fairly short tail here, but before the knot comes in contact with the skin, you want to stick the needle through between the two threads so that you have it looping around itself and basically creating what's known as a lark's head, or a prusik. And so it is on there nice and tight. Or maybe not a prusik. My terminology is not what it used to be. But it's definitely a lark's head. So then you just stitch along like you normally would in fabric, snugging it a fair amount, but not too much to bend your seam over, because that's just kind of ugly. And so what I like to do with this particular one, because this does have to be fairly strong, and it's obviously double threaded already, I like to stitch across and then stitch back. So to save this video from being super long, I'm just going to do a time lapse and skip ahead. So now when you get to the end, you just knot it like you normally would in fabric. It's pretty simple. Sometimes some people say that using a leather needle for this will help better to get it through the skin properly and stuff and pierce the skin and whatever. I don't find I need it. I find that the skin, the hide is thin enough and everything, so I don't really need too much that way. So now you have your sewn band of fur. So what you want to do now is flip it so that you can put the good side of your fur to the inside of the hat. So you lay the band in. I like to line up some seams and stuff just for the sake of it. Lining up seams is something that I just do. And so once that's done, once you sort of get that whole thing, you obviously want another long piece of thread. I probably could have got away with a shorter piece for stitching the first thing, but I like to start off with a fresh long piece of thread, just so that this one that started to tangle on me while I was sewing this won't tangle on me when I sew the hat. And yeah, that's about it. And also making sure that I have a long enough length to work with. And again, you want to thread it the same way, just because you don't want it to tear through the skin, even though you could, in theory, knot the thread the way that you would for fabric. Stitch it through the hat first, and then stitch the skin. But I kind of just like to double the thread on this anyway, because it is something that is prone to breakage. If somebody who's got slightly too big of a head puts it on, they can pop the skin and everything, or pop stitches or things like that. So it's just better to be safe than sorry, because it is kind of a pain to have to fix things when they break. And so basically it's just stitching this on. Again, the same method used, just stitching through, and you can stitch through the whole lot of it, or you can stitch through half. It's just going to be that your skin folds over there anyway, so that you get a nice rolled thing with the fur. So once that's snug, you just continue going along, just like you normally would, and changing your thread if you need to. And that's the basic of that. And then, if you've sewn on the inside strip, once this is done, you just flip it to the outside and you're done. If it's the next one, then we will watch the next step. And then after that, we're going to make the shape. So I am going to continue sewing this on, and I will come back in a moment. So when you have that sewn on, the next thing you're going to want to do is to turn it. And so you're basically just rolling the edge over. And so if you have that strip sewn on, you can just leave it here and go on to the manufacture or sewing on of the shape. If you're doing it the way that I'm doing it, then you're going to want to do this step, which is pretty easy. But that being said, it can be kind of a pain, because you're sewing in the direction that the pelt is the furriest, so you're contending with a large amount of fur. So what you want to do is basically just pick up a little tiny piece of just the outside fabric, not the liner as well, just the outer shell, and up through the skin, and then pull that stitch in, and basically go around the entire outside of this of the rim. Doing that, your stitch width can be fairly large. It doesn't have to be particular. It doesn't have to be hugely strong. Just enough to hold it in place, and just enough to help it resist being bashed around by people putting their head on everything. So basically, it's just there to reinforce the rim, so that it doesn't piece of trim, so that it doesn't get torn or anything. And so it's just basically going along and just stitching that edge and trying to keep most of the hair out of the thread as possible, as much as possible, so that you can not have it pinch too much, so you still have the fluffiness of it. So I'm going to, again, just keep doing that, and so I think I'm going to end that video there, and do the actual manufacture of the shape in the next one. But I am probably going to post them at the same time, or one right after the next one, so that you don't have to wait anymore. This project has been going on long enough. I feel it's a little unfair for me to keep drawing it out, so I'm going to try and get it out as quickly as possible. So the next video will be the shape. If you're buying a shape, the one from Wolfland, if you don't have enough knowledge of metalworking to be able to make one, I do recommend buying one. And it's more authentic than the one that I make, but the one that I make is pretty decent. So that's available through Wolfland. Link is below. And basically you just sew it on through the holes, and that's that. It's kind of like sewing on a button. But if you're waiting for the next video, it'll be next. So, thank you for watching.